Our next speaker is Father Peter Dubovský, whose introduction is not needed. He is currently the rector and professor ordinarius of Old Testament exegesis at the Pontifical Biblical Institute. He has written monographs on the building of the First Temple, a text critical and historical study, and also on the Neo-Assyrian Kepu, spies or officials, and its relevance for 2 Kings 18 to 19. Father Dubovský will be speaking on verbs for starting a military campaign in Sargon II's inscriptions.
Thank you very much for organizing, Paula, this conference. And my presentation is about starting a military campaign, a study of the verb of motion in Sargon's inscriptions. Well, just to tell you, I went through all the verbs in all the Sargon's inscription. It was very boring exercise, but I hope it brought some results. An examination of Sargon's inscription reveals that the scribes, Sargon scribes, employed 3 distinct modes of description to recount the king's movements. Primarily, they use the typical verbs of movements like alaku, eteku, kerebu, and so on. Secondly, they use idiomatic expressions such as getting someone moving, or literally to open one's leg, or to direct a march, or to seize the road, to set out, to set one's face, or to advance, to place walking. And finally, they employed metaphoric expressions like, for example, to envelop, katamu, or to cover like a locust or like a cloud, or to fall upon some like a fierce arrow. Well, upon scrutinizing the whole corpus of Sargon's inscription, it was very interesting that these 2 inscriptions, and this is Najafabad stele, which is describing and focusing on the 6th campaign of Sargon against Manea, and the inscription TCL3, which is a very famous 8th campaign of Sargon against Urartu. So this becomes evident that these 2 particular inscriptions deviate from the previously outlined usage of the verbs of motion. The salient feature of distinguishing this inscription is a utilization of the verb namasu, signifying departure, so the verb of movement, initiation of the movement, or commencement of transit from one place, one location to the other. In TCL3, the verb occurs 13 times. In Najafabad stele, it occurs 14 times. And no other inscription of Sargon contains this verb. Then I went through all other inscriptions of Neo-Assyrian kings, and I found that in Tiglath-Pileser III, there is this verb namashu, to depart, occurs only once. In Esarhaddon, only once. Twice in Ashurbanipal, and note doesn't occur in Sennacherib inscriptions. So this comparative analysis indicates that the verb namashu emerged as a distinctive feature within Sargon's inscription 65 and 117 on the one hand. On the other hand, its usage to depict the movements of the king on his campaign stands out as an uncharacteristic within the broader corpus of Neo-Assyrian royal inscription. In other words, the employment of the verb namashu did not conform to established norms of royal rhetoric during the Neo-Assyrian era, despite its widespread utilization in the Neo-Assyrian letters. So it was known, they knew it, but they refused to use it in Neo-Assyrian inscription, except these two inscriptions. So the whole point is why. And I will anticipate some kind of conclusions, and what I would like to say that most so far presented studies on the 6th and 8th campaign were confined to the physical context, spatial temporal setting of the movements of the kings, and those scholars reconstructed the itinerary of both campaigns. However, the social and cultural context of the verbs of motion, in particular the verb namasu, in these campaigns has been ignored. And analyzing it, I propose three levels of interpretations. The utilization of the verb namasu serves to partition Sargon's military campaigns into distinct geographic segments. Second, the utilization of the verb reveals Sargon's intentional emulation of an archaic linguistic style reminiscent of that employed by Shalmaneser III. And the third, the selection of this term by Sargon II potentially serve as a means to assert divine agency, particularly referencing to the deity Nanaya. So now let's see these three aspects and what we can say. So first, delimiting the stages of the military campaigns, especially of various kings. So the first king who employed this verb in the royal inscriptions is Adad Narari II. In these inscriptions, this inscription describes king's march along the Habur and the Euphrates rivers. From the literary viewpoint, this is the first royal inscriptions that fully develops the literary structure of the itinerary, alternating the verb biatu to spend the night and erebu to enter. Look at the description, how is it? Atumush, I left, bedak, I spent the night. Then atumush, erub, I enter. And this is very monotonous, repeating. And this is segmentation of the whole campaign into small stages. Now, if we apply extrapolating this framework to these two inscriptions of Sargon, it becomes evident that the scribes use the verb namasu to partition the 6th and 8th campaign into smaller segments. And this is a first partition of chapter of inscription 117, and this is 65. You can see it, this is one of the three possible reconstruction of the itinerary of the campaign, but they wanted to divide it in different groups. So this is the first meaning of the verb namashu. And in conclusion, we can observe that the verb namashu was used in royal itineraries, and its primary meaning is to demarcate the stages of the king's march. Being a verb of inherently directed motion, it has a telic aspect to depart from one place in order to arrive to another place. So it perfectly suits the itinerary style of the inscription. However, Ponkia and Liverani showed another aspect of the verbs of motion in these campaigns, especially Adad Nirari, and they concluded that this campaign was not a real military campaign, but rather a parade aiming at collecting tribute and reestablishing bonds of loyalty on the parts of riverine city-states. Well, it was not a real campaign. It was a presentation. It was a sort of show of strength, show of power. I am here, I am the king, and you have to bow down in front of me. Applying this conclusion to Sargon's rhetoric used in 6th and 8th campaign, we can conclude that the verb namashu served to ideological purposes as well. It bolstered the king's image in Manea and Urartu into two regions that for years resisted to Assyria. So it was like show of power. I am the true king. Now, let's move to the second aspect, imitation of an older royal rhetoric. Contextualization of these inscriptions, we can see that Adad Narari II was the first one who used it, but we can also notice that this inscription, as it is used in the verb namashu, used in Adad Nirari's inscription, it's atypical for Adad Nirari as well. It's not a typical. And the verb is exclusively found in this tablet, specifically employed within the account detailing the Adad Narari's Khabur's and Euphrates campaign. The king's itinerary is described in a very concise and highly stylized form. Look at this description. So it's there is very little said about the campaign itself. It's a very highly stylized form. Now, if we go to the next king, Tukulti-Ninurta II, the verb namashu appears 40 times, and what you have on the left, moving on from A, from the city, I approached B, I pitched camp and spent the night in B. This is a very stereotype expression. But on the right side, in yellow, you can see two instances which are different. And these two instances, they basically describe the defeat of Nairi. And look at the inscription, what does it say? With the support of the god Ashur, I move out from Nineveh. I destroyed 2 cities in these environs. I carried off the grain and so on. I struck many with the sword and so on. So it's basically introduction to a campaign. So he continues what Nirari did, and he invented something new. If we go to Ashur-Natsirpal, he also continues with Tukulti-Ninurta, exactly the same wording, but this description of the royal campaigns, as we can see it, is much more pronounced. There's much more, what you see it in yellow. This later usage introduces accounts of enemy defeats, the submission of the local kings, the construction activities, and so on and so on. Now, if we go to Shalmaneser III, this, what we can conventional rhetoric, is no longer there. What appears is only namashu serves as an introduction into military victories, other significant events such as clearing paths, erecting stela, capturing cities, and so on. So, what we can say is that it served in Shalmaneser inscription as a marker to stages of the stages of king's campaign, but it was developed as a starting point for describing the military campaign, which does not occur, for example, in Adad Narari. Now, another very interesting aspect is the spelling. If we look at how the verb namashu or atush was written in Adad Nirari, it was always natu, atu mush, with the preposition ishtu. If you go to Tukulti-Ninurta, he has 2 other spellings. You can see atu, musha. If you go to Ashur-Natsirpal, he has 4 different spellings, or 5 with atu mush. And if you go to Shalmaneser, it became fixed. Only atu mush. No other spelling exists. So my conclusion is an analysis of Sargon's inscription, we can notice a deliberate emulation of the style found in Shalmaneser's record. Firstly, these 2 inscriptions of Sargon refrain from utilizing the conventional expression like to set up the tent and to spend the night. Secondly, a notable resemblance exists between the sequence of verbs employed in Shalmaneser's and Sargon's inscription. After namashu, there are the verbs, exactly the same verbs also in Sargon. Thirdly, namashu functions as a literary device in both Shalmaneser's and Sargon's inscriptions to demarcate distinct stages of the military campaigns. And lastly, Sargon's scribes also replicate a standardized spelling atu mush. So this is a second aspect of this verb, rhetorical and sociological aspect. Now, an interesting thing can be noticed if we speak about claiming divine agency. So, there is a very interesting hymn, Sargon's hymn, dedicated to goddess Nanaya. Goddess Nanaya was originally the god of love, and then later it became the god of warfare. So she is presented here as a skilled physician and also someone who should safeguard Sargon's agriculture yield. Now, if we look at the verb, go forth and depart, exactly the same words. Now, if we look at the description of Nanaya, so she is presented like a real warrior with naked sword, pointed axe, and so on and so on. Now, how is described Sargon? As a follower of Nanaya. And if we look at how he described himself, the words which I use are exactly the same in the hymn and in Sargon's inscription. So he's presenting himself like a warrior, following the Nanaya, goddess Nanaya. In sum, this comparison suggests that Sargon II uses this verb namasu in the royal inscription is one of the ways of claiming divine agency. Sargon presented himself as the one who acted for and represented gods, in this case, the goddess of warfare Nanaya. So we suggest that Sargon's setting out namasu for a campaign emulates Nanaya's setting out for war. Now, let us go through conclusions. Our examination has revealed that the inscription 65 and 117 depart from the typical rhetorical style of Neo-Assyrian inscription by using the word namasu. So the word namasu has a physical meaning to set out, to depart. It's like to start a movement. We have seen that it has a rhetorical meaning, and it means to delineate the various stages of royal military campaigns. We have seen that he tried to emulate the rhetorical style of Shalmaneser royal inscription, because the real king before him was actually Shalmaneser. And we have seen that he tried to align himself with the goddess Nanaya, claiming her divine agency. Now, what is the sociological meaning of these uses of the verb? It was to exalt Sargon by associating him with the major king, Shalmaneser III, and the goddess of war, Nanaya. What is a political meaning? And this conclusion is significant when we consider that Sargon ascended to throne through usurpation, necessitating both successful military campaigns and compelling rhetoric to legitimize his reign. Recent studies of Sargon's annals indicate that his initial campaigns were not particularly successful. Some victories were even achieved thanks to his generals, not thanks to him. Indeed, Sargon's first two, we can say, genuinely successful campaigns were the 6 campaigns and 8 campaigns described in these 2 inscriptions we studied. Therefore, we suggest that the choice of the verb of motion, namasu, was deliberate and served as a rhetorical tool to bolster Sargon's image during the turbulent period following the death of Tiglath-Pileser III. Thank you very much.